Good evening, boys and girls. Back again. Today I'm going to read you chapter 3 and 4 of Charlotte's Web. The barn, this is called Escape, chapter 3. The barn was very large. It was very old. It smelled of hay and it smelled of manure. It smelled of the perspiration of tired horses and the wonderful sweet breath of patient cows. It often had the sort of peaceful smell as though nothing bad could ever happen in the world. It smelled of grain and harness dressing and axle grease and rubber boots and new rope. And whenever the cat was given a fish head to eat, the barn would smell like fish. But mostly it smelled of hay, for there was always hay in the great loft up overhead, and there was always hay being pitched down to the cows and the horses and the sheep. The barn was pleasantly warm in winter, when the animals spent most of their time indoors, and it was pleasantly cool in summer when the big doors stood open wide to the breeze. The barn had stalls on the main floor for work horses, tie-ups on the main floor for cows, and sheepfold down below for the sheep, and a pig pen down below for Wilbur. It was full of all sorts of things you would find in barns. Ladders, grindstones, pitchforks, monkey wrenches, scythes, lawnmowers, snow shovels, axe handles, milk pails, water buckets, empty grain sacks, and rusty rat traps. It was the kind of barn that swallows loved to come and make their nests in. It was the kind of barn that children liked to play in. And the whole thing was owned by Fern's uncle, Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman. Wilbur's new home was in the lower part of the barn, directly beneath the cows. Mr. Zuckerman knew that a manure pile is a good place to keep a young pig. Pigs need warmth, and it was warm and comfortable down there in the barn cellar on the south side. Fern came almost every day to visit him. She found an old milking stool that was discarded, and she put it next to the sheepfold, next to Wilbur's pen. Here she sat quietly during the long afternoons, thinking and listening and watching Wilbur. The sheep got to know her and to trust her, and so did the geese who lived with the sheep. So here's Wilbur eating, and there's Fern sitting on her stool watching him. All the animals trusted her. She was so quiet and so friendly. Mr. Zuckerman didn't allow her to take Wilbur out, though, and he did not allow her to go into the pig pen. But he told Fern that she could sit on the stool and watch Wilbur as long as she wanted to. It made her happy just to be near the pig, and it made Wilbur happy to know that she was sitting right there outside his pen. But he never had any fun. He had no walks, no rides, no swims. One afternoon in June, when Wilbur was almost 2 months old, he wandered out into the small yard outside the barn. Fern hadn't come yet, and Wilbur stood in the sun feeling lonely and bored. There's never anything to do around here, he thought, and he walked to his food trough and sniffed to see if there was anything that he overlooked at lunchtime. He found a small strip of potato skin and ate it. His back itched, so he leaned against the fence and rubbed against the boards. When he got tired of this, he walked out indoors, climbed on top of the manure pile, and sat down. He didn't feel like going to sleep, he didn't feel like digging, and he was tired of standing still, and he was tired of laying down. "I'm less than 2 months old, and I'm tired of living," he said, and he walked out to the yard again. "When I'm out here," he said, "there's no place to go but in, and when I'm indoors, there's no place to go but out." "That's where you're wrong, my friend," said a voice. Wilbur looked through the fence, and he saw the goose standing there. You don't have to stay in that dirty little yard," said the goose, who talked rather fast. "One of the boards is loose. Push on it, push on it, and come on out." "What?" Wait a minute, say that slower." "At the risk of repeating myself," said the goose, "I suggest you come on out. It's wonderful out here." "Did you say there was a board loose?" I did," said the goose. Wilbur walked to the fence, and he saw the goose was right. One board was loose. So he put his head down, shut his eyes, and he pushed, and the board gave way, and in a minute he had squeezed through the fence, and he was standing in the long grass outside his yard. The goose chuckled. "How's it feel to be free?" she asked. "I like it," said Wilbur. "That is, I think I like it." Actually, Wilbur felt weird being outside his fence. There was nothing between him and the big world. "Where do you think I'd better go?" Anywhere you like," said the goose. "Go down through the orchard, root up the sod, go to the garden, dig up radishes, root everything, eat grass, look for corn, look for oats, run all over, skip and dance." "The world's a wonderful place when you're young," said the goose. "Well, I can see that," said Wilbur. He jumped in the air, twirled, and ran a few steps, and he looked around. He smelled the sweet smells of the afternoon. Then he went walking down to the orchard, and he went under the shade of the apple tree. He put his strong snout into the ground and began pushing, digging, and rooting, and he was so happy he plowed up quite a big piece of ground before anyone noticed. But Mrs. Zuckerman, she was looking out her kitchen window, and she immediately shouted for the men. "Homer!" she cried. "Pigs out! Lurvy! Pigs out! Homer! Lurvy! Pigs out! He's down under the apple tree." "Uh-oh, now the trouble starts," said Wilbur. "I'm going to get it." The goose heard the racket, and she too started hollering. "Run, run, run downhill, make for the woods," she said to Wilbur. "They'll never, never, never catch you in the woods." The cocker spaniel heard the commotion, and he ran out from the barn to join the chase. Mr. Zuckerman heard, and he came out. And Lurvy, the hired man, heard the noise, and he came from the asparagus patch. He was pulling weeds down there. Everybody walked toward Wilbur, and Wilbur didn't know what to do. The woods seemed a long way off, and anyway, he'd never been down in the woods before, and he didn't think he was going to like it. "Get behind him, Lurvy," said Mr. Zuckerman. "Drive him towards the barn. Take it easy. Don't rush him. I'm going to get a bucket of slop." The news of Wilbur's escape spread to all the animals of the place. Whenever anybody broke loose on Zuckerman's farm, that was an event of great interest to all the other animals. The goose told the cow, and then the cow knew, and the cow told the sheep, and then the sheep knew, and the lambs learned from their mothers, and the horses heard, and "Wilbur's out," they all said. Every animal lifted his head and became excited. One of the friends had gotten free and was no longer penned up or tied fast. Wilbur didn't know what else to do or which way to run. It seemed as though everybody was after him. "If this is what it likes to be free," he said, "I would rather be penned up in my own yard." The cocker spaniel was sneaking up on him from the side. Lurvy, the hired man, was sneaking up on him from the other side. Mrs. Zuckerman was ready to head him off if he started for the garden, and Mr. Zuckerman was coming carrying a pail. "Why doesn't Fern come?" he thought. "This is awful." Poor Wilbur, he began to cry. The goose took command. "Don't just stand there, Wilbur. Dodge about," cried the goose. "Skip around, slip in and out, make for the woods, twist and turn." The cocker spaniel sprang for Wilbur's hind leg. Wilbur jumped and ran, and Lurvy reached out and grabbed Mrs. Zuckerman, and she screamed at Lurvy. The goose cheered for Wilbur. Wilbur dodged between Lurvy's legs, and Lurvy missed, and he grabbed the cocker spaniel instead. Nicely done, cried the goose. Try it again. "Run downhill," said the cows. "Run toward me," said the gander. "Run uphill," cried the sheep. "Twist and turn," honked the goose. "Jump and dance," said the rooster. So everybody is giving him directions about what to do. I'm sure he's getting overwhelmed. "Look out for Lurvy," called the cows. "Look out for Zuckerman," said the gander. "Watch out for the dog," cried the sheep. Listen to me," cried the goose. Poor Wilbur, he was dazed and frightened by all of this hullabaloo. He didn't like being the center of all this fuss. He tried to follow the instructions his friends were giving him, but he couldn't run downhill and uphill at the same time. He couldn't twist and turn when he was jumping and dancing. He was trying so hard. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig, not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern were there to take him in her arms and comfort him. And when he looked up and saw Mr. Zuckerman was close to him, carrying a pail of warm slop, he lifted his nose and he sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat middlings, Kellogg's cornflakes, popover from Zuckerman's breakfast. "Come, pig," said Mr. Zuckerman. "Come, pig." Wilbur took a step toward the pail. No, said the goose. "It's an old pail trick, Wilbur. Don't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into captivity." He's appealing to your stomach. Wilbur didn't care. The food smelled appetizing. He took another step toward the pail. "Pig, pig," said Mr. Zuckerman in a kind voice, and began walking slowly toward the barnyard, looking all about him innocently, as if he didn't know that a little white pig was following behind him. "You'll be sorry," said the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking towards the slop. "You'll miss your freedom. An hour of freedom is worth a barrel of slops?" Wilbur didn't care. When Mr. Zuckerman reached the pig pen, he climbed over the fence, poured the slop into the trough, pulled the loose board away from the fence, so there was a big hole for Wilbur to walk through. Reconsider, called the goose. Wilbur paid no attention. He stepped through the fence into his yard, walked to the trough, and took long drinks of the slop. It was good to be home again. While Wilbur ate, Lurvy fetched a hammer and some nails, and he nailed the board in place. Then he and Mr. Zuckerman leaned on the fence. Mr. Zuckerman scratched Wilbur's back with a stick. "He's quite a pig," said Lurvy. "Yes, he'll make a good pig," said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur heard the words of praise. He felt warm milk inside his tummy, and he felt the pleasant rubbing of a stick on his itchy back. He felt peaceful and happy and sleepy. This had been one tiring afternoon, and it was still only 4 o'clock. But poor Wilbur, he was already ready for bed. "I'm too young to go into the world alone," he thought, and he laid down. Chapter 4 is called Loneliness. So the next day, it was rainy and dark. Rain fell on the roof of the barn and dripped steadily from the eaves, and rain fell in the barnyard and ran in crooked courses down the lane. Rain spattered against Mrs. Zuckerman's kitchen window, came gushing out of the downspouts. Rain fell on the backs of the sheep as they gazed in the meadow, and when the sheep tired of standing in the rain, they walked slowly up the lane and into the fold. Rain upset Wilbur's plans. Wilbur had planned to go out this day, dig a new hole in his yard. He had other plans, too. His plans for the day went something like this. Breakfast at 6:30, skim milk, crust, middlings, bits of donuts, wheat cakes, drops of maple syrup sticking to them, potato skins, leftover custard pudding with raisins, and bits of shredded wheat. Breakfast would be finished at 7. From 7 to 8, Wilbur planned to have a talk with Templeton, the rat that lived under the trough. Talking with Templeton was not the most interesting occupation in the world, but it was better than nothing. From 8 to 9, Wilbur planned to take a nap outdoors in the sun. From 9 to 11, he planned to dig a hole or a trench, or possibly find something good to eat buried in the dirt. From 11 to 12, he planned to stand still and watch flies on the boards, watch bees in the clover, and watch swallows in the air. 12 o'clock was lunchtime. Middlings, warm water, apple parings, meat gravy, carrot scrapings, meat scraps, stale hominy, and the wrapper of a package of cheese. Lunch would be over at 1. From 1 to 2, Wilbur planned to sleep. From 2 to 3, he planned to scratch itchy places by rubbing against the fence. From 3 to 4, he planned to stand perfectly still and think what it was like to be alive and to wait for Fern. At 4 would come supper. Skim milk, provender, leftover sandwich from Lurvy's lunch, prune skins, a morsel of this, a bit of that, fried potatoes, marmalade drippings, a little more of this, a little more of that, piece of baked apple, a scrap of upside-down cake. Wilbur had gone to sleep thinking about these plans. He woke up at 6 and saw the rain, and it seemed as though he couldn't bear it. "I get everything all beautifully planned out, and it has to go and rain," he said. For a while, he stood gloomily indoors, and then he walked to the door and he looked out. Drops of rain stuck to his face. His yard was cold and wet. His trough had an inch of water in it, and Templeton was nowhere to be seen. "Are you out there, Templeton?" called Wilbur, but there was no answer. Suddenly, Wilbur felt lonely and friendless. "One day was just like another," he groaned. "I'm very young. I have no real friends here in the barn. And it's going to rain all morning and all afternoon, and Fern won't come in such bad weather. Oh, honestly," said Wilbur, and he was crying again for the second time in 2 days. At 6:30, Wilbur heard the banging of a pail, and Lurvy was standing outside in the rain, stirring up breakfast. "Come on, pig," said Lurvy. Wilbur didn't budge. Lurvy dropped the slop, scraped the pail, and walked away, and he noticed something was wrong with the pig. Wilbur didn't want food. He wanted love. He wanted a friend. He wanted someone who would play with him. He mentioned this to the goose, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the sheepfold. "Will you come play with me?" he asked. "Sorry, Sonny, sorry," said the goose. "I'm sitting on my eggs. 8 of them. Gotta keep 'em toasty, oasty, oasty warm. I have to stay right here. I'm flibbery, ibbery, gibbet. I do not play when there are eggs to hatch. I'm expecting goslings." "Well, I didn't think you were expecting woodpeckers," said Wilbur bitterly. Wilbur next tried one of the lambs. "Will you play with me?" he asked. "Certainly not," said the lamb. "In the first place, I can't get into your pen, as I'm not old enough to jump over the fence. In the second place, I'm not interested in pigs. Pigs mean less than nothing to me." "What do you mean, less than nothing?" said Wilbur. "I don't think there's anything such as less than nothing. Nothing is absolutely the limit of nothingness. It's the lowest you can go. It's the end of the line. How can something be less than nothing? If there was something less than nothing, then nothing would not be nothing. It would be something, even though it's just a very little bit of something. But if nothing is nothing, then nothing has nothing that is less than it is. That is confusing. "Oh, be quiet," said the lamb. "Go play by yourself. I don't play with pigs." So sadly, Wilbur lay down, listened to the rain, and he soon saw the rat climbing down a slanting board that he used as a stairway. And here's the picture of a little lamb who is not so nice to him. "Will you play with me, Templeton?" asked Wilbur. "Play," said Templeton, twirling his whiskers. "Play? I don't even know what that word means." "Well," said Wilbur, "it means to have fun, to frolic, to run, to skip, to make merry." "I never do those things if I can avoid them," said the rat. "I prefer to spend my time eating, gnawing, spying, and hiding. I'm a glutton, I'm not a merrymaker. And right now, I'm on my way to your trough to eat your breakfast, since you haven't got enough to eat it yourself. You don't have enough sense to eat it yourself." And Templeton the rat crept stealthily along the wall and disappeared into a private tunnel that he dug between the door and the trough. Templeton was a crafty rat, and he had things pretty much his own way. The tunnel was an example of his skill and cunning. The tunnel enabled him to get from the barn to his hiding place under the trough without coming out into the open. He had tunnels and runways all over Mr. Zuckerman's farm. He could get from one place to another without being seen. Usually he slept during the day, and he was out after dark. Wilbur watched him disappear into his tunnel. In a moment, he saw his sharp nose poke out from underneath the trough. Cautiously, Templeton pulled himself up over the edge of the trough. This was almost more than Wilbur could take on this dreary rainy day, to see his breakfast being eaten by somebody else. He knew Templeton was getting soaked out there in the pouring rain, but even that didn't comfort him. Friendless, dejected, and hungry, he threw himself down on the manure and he sobbed. Look at poor Wilbur. He's so upset. Late that afternoon, Lurvy went to Mr. Zuckerman. "I think there's something wrong with that pig of yours. He hasn't touched his food." "Give him 2 spoonfuls of sulfur and a little molasses," said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur couldn't believe what was happening to him. When Lurvy caught him and forced the medicine down his throat, this was certainly the worst day of his whole life. He didn't know whether he could endure the awful loneliness anymore. Darkness settled over everything. Soon there were only shadows and the noises of the sheep chewing their cuds, and occasionally the rattle of a cow chained up overhead. You can imagine Wilbur's surprise when out of the darkness came a small voice he had never heard before. It sounded rather thin, but it sounded very pleasant. "Do you want a friend, Wilbur?" it said. "I'll be a friend to you. I've watched you all day, and I like you." "But I can't see you," said Wilbur, jumping to his feet. "Where are you? Who are you?" "I'm right up here," said the voice. "Go to sleep. You'll see me in the morning." And that's where I'm going to end for today. So tomorrow, I'll read you chapter 5 and 6. So be thinking about who that little voice was, that friendly voice that Wilbur was hearing. I'm so excited to see who it is. All right, see you tomorrow.